In the beginning, the world was, and that was all. One eternal, stagnant moment with no beginning and no end. Grey was the fog that covered the land, and grey were the arched trees, whose trunks scraped up to the sky and plunged deep below the earth. Grey were the everlasting dragons, whose scales were stone and whose wheels were iron. And below that was darkness. And that was all. Until it wasn't. Until there was fire. And with fire came disparity. The world now knew heat, and in its absence they knew cold. It now knew life, and in its absence, death. They now knew of light, and in its absence, they knew darkness. And out of that darkness, that very first darkness, deep below the world of grey, they came. They were hollow beings, bereft of all, and saw fire for the first time, and in seeing that fire they knew they were or now aware of their own emptiness, and of disparity's flame they filled themselves. Mightiest of all were the four souls of lords, the most foundational aspects of disparity. And those who took that for their own, they knew divinity. The soul of life went to the witch Ezelith and her daughters of chaos, and its twin, the soul of death, went to the grave lord Nito, first to ever know death itself. And the soul of light went to Gwyn, he who would become a high lord, the lord of sunlight, the mightiest of all the gods. And the soul of dark, you ask? The dark soul went to the furtive pygmy, oft forgotten. Now he had no interest in lordship or of crowns. He took the dark soul into his hands, and he split it. He doled them out to his fellows, and it filled their hollowness just enough. And in those he gave that gift began to stir humanity. Now High Lord Gwyn, Grave Lord Nito, and the witch Ezelith now knew power, and at that same moment they knew want. Why, ascended as they now were, would they content themselves with the world below? The everlasting dragons above knew nothing but primacy. Surely now they could be made to understand otherwise. It was war then, the first war ever waged, and it would have ended as soon as it began, if High Lord Gwyn had not caught the eye of Seath, the one dragon born without scales. Now perhaps Seath understood disparity and want in a way that was all too personal. For as you see, it was a dragon's scales that tethered them to eternity, and without them Seath was a victim of time. He resented his peers for this, but in this curse he found knowledge. He knew now that his fellows could be made as finite as he was, and he knew how it could be done. And all of this he told the young High Lord. From then on, it was only a matter of time. High Lord Gwyn took his bolts of lightning, pure sunlight itself, and they sheared the scales from every dragon they touched. And now bereft of scales, why, death was able to take them, Grave Lord Nito coming to claim them into his own domain. The war was long. It had been High Lord Gwyn that had started it, and by the time it was over, his own firstborn son was fighting on the first lines alongside him. But what they started was now inevitable, and before long the everlasting dragons were no more. The world belonged to the lords, and they would go on to make it in Disparity's image. A grand cathedral city they erected for themselves, Anor Londo, the city of the gods. And under their wing they shepherd humanity still in its infancy. Their new subjects would go on to build kingdoms, start families, lead lives. The gods looked upon their work and saw that it was good. And in that same moment, High Lord Gwyn became aware of an unbearable truth. It was a truth that he himself had taught the dragons, once everlasting, now ruined. Even the brightest of fires is doomed to fade. Welcome to Dark Souls